Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen. It's really a pleasure to welcome back Luanne Rice, who's been kind enough to say that her visit here, her last visit here, was memorable. And I only wish that this visit were live and therefore memorable, but we're going to do the best we can with Zoom, aren't we, Luanne?
You definitely are, Barbara. So great to see you and to be with you, even if not in person.
Well, thank you. Luann, I counted up now, according to the blurb in your book, The Shadow Box, and let me mention now, because I keep forgetting to do this, that Luann has kindly autographed the hardcover. We also have a paperback edition, but we have signed hardcover copies of this wonderful book. And it says that you have written 35 novels that have been translated into 24 languages. But I counted the books that are in the front, and this looks to me like your 38th book. So who's right?
So funny. Okay, so somebody else counted it the other day and said it's 36, but I, it's a lot of books,
It is.
a lot of books. And maybe it's partly because, the young adult novels, there are three young adult novels, so maybe they weren't added into this count of 35, but I'm glad you've got 38. I'm going with 38, Barbara.
Well, that's what it says in the front of your book. You'll be happy to know because I did count. In any case, obviously, a much published, well published, very popular author, as you can tell from those figures. She's acquired a couple of honorary degrees over the course of her writing career, and in 2014 received the 2014 Connecticut Governor's Arts Award for her excellence as a literary artist. Several of her books have been adapted for television: Crazy in Love for TNT, Blue Moon for CBS, Follow the Stars for Home, and Silver Bells for the Hallmark Hall of Fame, and Beach Girls for Lifetime. You know, I find that one of the great things about, let me rephrase that, there are no great things about the pandemic. One of the interesting things about the pandemic, Luann, has been the the increase in long form television and adaptations of novels, which I think works to everybody's advantage. So, do you have, because this will come up, I'm just going to ask you at the beginning, do you have anything in production or, in consideration from this vast array of books?
I do. I'm not in production, but a couple of really exciting, almost maybe, you know how it is with books and with writers that it's there can be so much excitement and then things fall apart or fall away. But right now there are two really exciting possibilities.
And you can't talk about either one, right?
Not yet because they're not real yet, but one is young adult and one is adult, and one is one of my suspense novels.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, I really was interested that Robin Carr's Virgin River, which is, not crime and not Harry Potter and all, has had two seasons, and I think a third one is slated. And then I've looked at, Bridgerton, and I mean, I am a dedicated Regency romance reader. I grew up on Georgette Hare. I absolutely love Loretta Chase. And I find it fascinating that all of a sudden Bridgerton has brought, the romance novel to long form television. Wow.
Such a good thing, and and so many of our friends, my friends from the writing world, from throughout my career, have had huge success with long form television. Harlan Coben is a perfect example of Netflix, and Michael Conley with Bosch, and uh, just I'm waiting for other friends to. I can't. I always love to tune in because I'm such a fan of their books, and I think in many cases the adaptations are fantastic. I think they've gotten really, really good. And then
I
remember,
agree.
in the old days, everyone wanted a feature film, and now it's everyone wants a TV series.
Well, I think, feature films have to condense books. And while sometimes that works, if you were Elmore Leonard and it was like all dialogue, you could make a great movie. But for so many books, um, trying to trim it down into whatever it is that you get from a feature film, 120 minutes or something, is not fair. And Ian Rankin and I had this discussion once, even relating to TV, that when they put his Rebus books, when they did them for television back in the day, they did a whole book for, hour and a half of television, and it was just painful. And so, one of these days I think he's hoping that they will redo them and they can do long form, and therefore take several episodes to develop a
Yeah,
book. And
that
look,
would that would be good. I think that that's works out a lot better. I wrote a script with a friend of Dream Country, my only Western. It's
yeah,
funny, Omar Leonard, because of Justified, right? Wasn't that Elmer Leonard? I think it was
I'm not sure.
show based on. But anyway, it was so much fun to do, and I want to make a documentary about the not making of Dream Country because we wrote it a long time ago. We had unbelievable people attached uh, to be in it, and one thing has happened when it or another. People, somebody who was supposed to be the teenager is now in her 30s, and unfortunately, our dear friend Robert Loggia was supposed to be Dalton, and he passed away. So he, but I mean, he will always be Dalton in my heart. But it's just so funny. We've had producers, and it happens, and it doesn't happen, and it's a very interesting process. It's a lot of fun.
I think there's a huge amount of luck involved. I think timing is involved, the right person attached at the right moment. There are things that get made that leave me puzzled, and there are things that don't get made that leave me, despairing. I think the thing about Bridgerton that has really captured people are the incredible production values. I mean, the clothes are just, it's fashion porn. You could watch it just for the clothes.
That's what I've been hearing. I haven't watched it yet. I'm going to. But I've heard the clothes and the settings and the great country houses are supposed to be amazing. And
They
uh,
really are. And then there's a lot of there's a lot of sex, which I
which
thought grew really boring. First, frankly, sorry for anybody who will be offended if I say this. I think they could have cut it from 8 to 7 because if they just like had one sex scene instead of multiple sex scenes, many of them in very uncomfortable and unlikely places, I might add. I think it would have been better and frankly truer to the Regency romance novel, but that's just me. Anyway, the reason I brought it up was that it occurred to me when I read Shadowbox, and I actually reread it today in order to chat with you, it would make a really good movie. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of action. Did you see this? Was this when you're writing, do you see what's going on in a as though you're running a movie in your head?
I think I am a very visual writer. I don't think in terms of a movie or in terms of that kind of action. I always begin with a character, with the main character, and there's usually something in her that reflects a concern of mine or an interest in mine. We have a visitor. That's
We
Emily.
do. We're being Zoom bombed by the cat. I know, but she's great. She was behind you running up and down the stairs. I don't think you could see her. It was great.
That's Emelina. Um, but I start with the character, and the character is um sorry. She's just really wants to be part of this.
That's fine.
Oh, good. We'll just ignore her. If she's making noise, it's just saying hello. She's very happy and well fed. So, uh, but I'm distracted, I have to admit, but I'll try not to be. I'm going to look at you, Barbara, and not
All
at Emma.
right. You can't see her, but I can. So just
Okay,
look forward. Right.
good. Okay. But so I start with the character, and the character is set in motion through whatever it is that's kind of got me gripped, and then uh, the story just unfolds. But I see it very clearly. Like I don't plot, I don't take notes, anything like that. But I know where it's happening, and I know who she is, and so I do see it, and I guess she's propelled by whatever internal force it is, and then whatever external forces come into play. Like in the shadow box, it opens with a woman who's attacked and left for dead. I mean, and then what happens to her? That's how it, that's it. But I knew where it took place. It's actually, so I'm living here. This is my childhood family beach house that my grandparents built. So I've spent every summer of my life here, and it's as familiar to me as anything ever could be. I look out the window at a beach, and then at the far side there are these woods. It's a wilderness, it's protected land, and that's where this takes place. The novel takes place between here the woods, and then the next point of land, which is a very affluent and posh area. And so that was in my mind the whole time. I mean, I don't call it by the same name. Um, a lot of my novels take place in Black Hall, which is based on Old Lyme, uh, which is where I live. This is Old Lyme. So it's very clear. So I guess in that way, it's really visual for me.
Well, I think, yeah, certainly the landscapes of the book are very visual because, I mean, we have a dramatic opening scene and within an old building or an outpost, not the main house, but what is it, the studio or garage or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact that I don't want to spoil how it works, but the fact that it's old is what saves Claire from actually dying when she should have. So I like that. I like the fact that in point of fact, the structure saved her, which I thought was great. And then, she's in the shoreline. There's a very dramatic scene at the shore in an earlier point of time where crabs come out of the water and it's the clicking of the crabs and so forth that lead to the discovery of a body. And that I thought was incredibly visual. I don't know if you could do that easily in a movie, but now I guess with all the AI stuff they could do, they could create the crabs without actually real crabs.
Right. I have
and
one hopes, not real crabs.
yeah, and then you have a scene on the water, where there's a boat and terrible things are happening and somebody's clinging to something. That's a really visual scene. But the thing that I thought was very powerful was the mansion, the recreation of this Scottish mansion there on the shore. Is that something that you've seen, or did you just take that? I mean, I've been to Scotland and been in places like that, but I have not been in Connecticut in a Scottish mansion.
It isn't exactly. There isn't a place really like that. It's called Ravens Crag in the book. And I found out there is a real Ravens Crag, or there was up in Canada, that was based on the sort of the family seat in Scotland. But what I based it on is an old boyfriend of mine. When I was a teenager, his family had a stone house that was it was so magical to me. And it was on a long driveway that went up to the top of a bluff and looked out at the mouth of the Connecticut River and the and Long Island Sound. And they were Scottish. They were American, but with Scottish descent. So like you'd go there and they'd always be playing Scotland the Brave and serving scotch and wearing kilts. I mean, truly, I'm not kidding. And it just captivated me when I was very young. And so when I was writing this novel, I just thought that has to be in it. Like it wasn't, I didn't plan it. It was just all of a sudden, oh, that's where this is. Um,
Well, I think shifting the scenes, from these very vivid locations really add a lot to reading the book because, you have a gift for making us see them as well. And I enjoyed that part of the book. I'm very much, I love books that have landscapes. I mean, Tony Hillerman, I fell in love with him when he wrote The Blessing Way because I mean, now I live in Arizona, but I grew up in Chicago in Winnetka, and it was incredibly exotic to me to think about, the Navajo reservation and the high desert and the mountains and the whole bit. And so I love books where the landscape is a character. And I definitely think in Shadowbox that, these landscapes taken together are a major character in the book.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I also love landscapes when I'm reading. And some authors it's such a hallmark of their work. Sometimes it's very particular region, or in cases it's just they travel about and, it will be wherever they set the novel. But an example, Paul Duaron, the way he writes about Maine is, and I love Maine. I often go to Maine to revise my novels. And for years I have, and I discovered him and, just love the way he gets Maine. He's a native, obviously, and so.
He's a writer that I have been with since the beginning. We've launched his last, I don't know, probably 5 books 5 or 6 anyway. And we did a wonderful event with him and Tess Gerritsen, both of them in Maine, they're neighbors, in when his book came out, I think it was July 1st. And I think his most recent book, which is his 10th book, is his best book. And part of the reason I loved it is that it goes up onto the Maine border, and part of the action, if you've read it, takes him across, into Canada to the Cajun community, but the land, I mean, they're all, it's always vivid in all of his books, but in this particular book, I thought that the landscape was just a knockout.
I loved that too. And that part of Maine is so remote, and most people who visit Maine don't get up there. But I think Aroostook County is if I'm remembering correctly, but I do, and that was you know, crossing the border, and then what was happening personally and emotionally. And that's what another thing I love about his work is that there's a lot of personal, the characters are, you get to know their lives, and his family connections, and Charlie and all that. But yeah, he's wonderful, and I love Tess. Tess is, gave me a wonderful quote, and is so, like many of my writer friends, has been very generous. But she and I have the same agent, and she's such a great writer. I loved her last setting. It was such an unusual. It was a gothic, really, on the Maine coast. What was the name of the house where the ghost widows something?
Yeah, well, yes, it is very much a Du Maurier kind of a book with the, renting the art. She rents that house, or it's almost like a lighthouse, isn't it? Or no, it's just a mansion.
Right, coast though. Yeah, like an
Yeah,
old Victorian, I think it was.
right. Yep. No, those were absolutely wonderful books. And I was thinking about, Paul, we'll come back to you here in a minute, but Paul's book Set on the Island with the Deers and I thought that was one of the most horrifying things. Martin Walker actually wrote in one of his Bruno Chief of Police books, which are set in Dordogne
I
in
love it.
France.
Yeah,
But the same thing with the deer and the overgrazing and the too large a population and the deer ticks. And it's interesting to make, to recognize that whatever country you're in, there are similar sorts of things, whether it's Maine or whether it's France,
yeah, it's
there
true.
we are.
To take something kind of ordinary, or not ordinary, but something that is from nature, and then to turn it into this aspect of, a really dark suspense novel. It was well done. And the moose too, the way he wrote about the diseased moose. I will never forget that. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's come back to you. And I brought up the landscape and the houses because I think that you have given Claire a really interesting artistic outlet. And I recognized when I was doing this, because I was just writing our February newsletter, that a book, 18 tiny, what is it, 18 tiny lives, things, whatever it is, stories, is just come out in paperback. And it's about the woman, I think her name is Gleason, that constructed those little crime scene. She created miniature crime scenes to show how things worked, and they're now in the Smithsonian. I think it's called 18 Tiny Lives now that I think about it. Anyway, and I've been to the Smithsonian and I've seen that collection where she meticulously recreated these crime scenes in order for people to do forensic investigation. And so, you've got Claire doing these shadow boxes, and I thought the timing was so interesting. It's like, a gift that they're coming out, your book and that book are coming out together. What inspired you to have her do that?
Well, so the way she does shadow boxes, she's very affected by nature, as I am. And when she goes on walks, she goes through the woods and along the beach, and she picks up little treasures. And I do too. And I mean, I could show you my bookcase, and it's got little owl pellets and pieces of sea glass and bits of lichen, and a little hummingbird's nest that is lined with human hair. That's, just very beautiful things. The crab claws, and I don't know if you happen to notice on the hardcover. Well, I'll show it to you in a minute. But and then also I had a college professor, my art professor at Connecticut College was Maureen McCabe, and Maureen does these dioramas, or I mean, they're sort of like shadow boxes. Actually, I've got one right here,
Ah, okay.
and it's
Yes,
called
we can
Mars.
see it.
And she weaves a story into it, and on the back she writes and has little clips, and and it fascinated me. It always has, and it's so intricate and so much of a story. And when I was little, my grandmother, who we called Mim, who built this house, took me to her friend's house, and there was a shadow box on the wall. It was the first one I ever saw, and it wasn't like Maureen's. It was, homemade, handmade, and it just had little, treasures from the family, from her friend's family in there. Mary Rastelli was the name of her friend, and I just was, from that moment on. I thought, I just want one. I want to make one. And I'm not terribly artistic, unfortunately. Both my sisters are, and my mother was, um, and so, but I do collect all this stuff. And so I think when I was writing about Claire, I knew she was going to be an artist, because I do like to write about artists. I love art. And I just felt that she had this kind of talismanic connection with what she was finding. Her father had died, and he was the person who kind of introduced her to the wilderness and to finding a way of survival in nature. And so that's what I had her doing. And I think it's weaving a story. It's not just something that's completely visual. It's telling a story and filling it with meaning. And I don't know, did you see, Barbara? Did you happen to see the hardcover?
Got it right here.
Okay, look at this little treasure. You take the jacket off, and look what's behind it.
Oh, I did not do that. Aha.
That'd be
Oh, there it is now. For
so
those, whoops, sorry, if you can't see it too clearly, but look, there it is on the back. That's a lovely touch.
wonderful.
I'm so glad you mentioned it because, I mostly read books in advanced reading copies and they don't come with all this. So
They don't come, but Thomas and Mercer did that, and it was such a surprise to me too when I received the book. And Liz Pearson's my editor said, "Have you looked behind the cover?" It's like a mystery within a mystery.
it's on the back as well. Actually, it's a shame there's a dust jacket. I'm going to just put it up there now the way it is. And one of the things, the reason I brought this up, aside from the fact it's being an interesting thing for Claire to do, is that it is a clue. One of the boxes, it instigates much of what goes on in the action because it is a clue to an earlier crime and touches off much of the action in the book. So I thought it was really well done. You wouldn't expect, but again, it plays into the 18 Tiny Lives things where, again, that was a deliberate reconstruction of crime scenes so that people could study them in learning forensics. I think she did them a century or so ago. She was a real pioneer.
That's incredible.
I'll email you my little blurb about her book so you can see what I'm talking about.
I would love that.
Yeah, I think you'd find it really interesting. I grew up in Chicago, as I mentioned, and Mrs. Thorne, who was a wealthy woman with way too much money and time on her hands, decided to spend it by creating miniature rooms. And I mean, I've been to see Queen Mary's dollhouse in England, which is another one. But the Thorne Room collection at the Art Institute in Chicago is really famous. And she put together all these beautiful rooms like a dollhouse, but individual ones, and reflecting different periods and different countries and different ways of life. So you could have a Shakespearean kitchen and an Italian castle with a grand dining room, whatever. And she had everything made for it. The rugs are woven. You can read the books. Everything is real. And now there's a collection of them at the Phoenix Art Museum. So I use those as the background for some of my virtual events because I have a green screen at home. So I have a Georgian library and I have a beautiful 18th century music room from the Thorne Rooms from the Art Museum. So I grew up with that kind of thing. And so the shadow boxes and what you've done here seemed, they were a certain nostalgia for me because I used to go visit them with my grandmother. We would have lunch at the Art Institute and, it was a big day to go down on the train to the city and have lunch and look at the museum. And, you've mentioned your grandmother and, you know, they're part of the fabric of our lives, aren't they? When we do things
Yeah,
with them when we're young.
completely. And that, I love the Art Institute, but I've never seen that exhibit there. I mean, the Matisses and the Chagall windows and the Georgia O'Keeffe as you come down the stairs. I mean, I can really picture so many things there. My college roommate grew up in Wilmette and Winnetka, so I'd go to see her, and also along the way on book tours, but I never saw that exhibit, and
Well, if you go back, it's actually one of the most popular attractions there is at
wow,
the Art Institute. And then my husband's great grandfather, who founded Sears and Roebuck, he has a big collection of German glass. Julius, and I think her name was Alva Rosenwald. So that's another big collection at the Art Institute. So
I've seen the glass. I didn't realize that was related to your husband. How
it is. Well, Julius Rosenwald built the Rosenwald Science, the Science and Industry Museum in Chicago. When I was a child, was called the Rosenwald Museum, but he left and Ravinia was his summer home, but he didn't want the museum to live on as a Rosenwald museum, so he requested that it change its name and become the Science and Industry Museum, and it's based on the one in Munich,
oh,
which my husband and I have traveled to. But I digress, as I always do. Anyway, back to this. You've got multiple narrators in this book. I mean, Claire is the core character and the one we first meet. But you also have other people telling the story. Is that something you enjoy? Different points of view while you're going along.
I found it very interesting lately. The last couple of books I have used that to come at the story from a different angle, and and I mean I my first novel was first person. I've written several first person novels. I love that too, and of course just plain old third person. But in this case, it just felt like the story. I just felt as if to really tell it the way I wanted to, um, and to really get into Claire in many ways, because as we know, to get to know one character, it's often through the eyes of another, through the experience of another. And maybe also just because for me, writing suspense and it not being something I've done for a long time, that it to me, it upped the suspense for myself, and made it, kind of, I guess a little darker maybe, and a little bit more, uh, because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know. I had no clue as I was going on. So it helped me stay off balance, I think.
Well, your premise when we start is that Claire, who's being attacked with a knife and strung up with a rope, that her husband is trying to kill her. But then as we move along, other things develop. But we know from the beginning that this is an antagonistic marriage at this point. And the husband, who is ambitious, is wanting to run a campaign to become governor. And she has knowledge of something that would derail that campaign and he wants to silence her. But we know that from the get-go. But what I think is interesting is the way you have her, which is, like all emotion, and she knows a lot of stuff. And then you have the voice of the policeman, Connor, who's working this case, and he doesn't know all that stuff. And so you've got a police procedural running alongside the woman in jeopardy, and it's interesting the way they track along till we get to the conclusion. I also like the mountain lion, although we never actually see him. But I like the fact that the lion is out there, kind of, you know, what's the point of the lion? I mean, I loved him, but why is he there?
That I guess, okay, well, probably a couple things coming in. I lived in Malibu for quite a while, and there are mountain lions in Malibu in the Santa Monica Mountains. In spite of the fact they're there and they're known and they're tracked and they're collared, it's still it's very special when there's a sighting, and when they're, and sadly they they get killed crossing the freeway and things like that. But there's just something about a really wild animal, a large predator living in really within the community almost, very, very like kind of taking a hike through the woods and looking over your shoulder and it's crouched up on a rock. And here in Connecticut, there are still occasionally sightings. You know, you'll hear about a sighting of a panther. They call them panthers or cougars or mountain lions. And you know, from what I gather, you know, most scientists say that they were killed off 100 years ago, but there's still credible sightings. And one of my friends is he's the he's the director of eco travel for Connecticut Audubon. And when I was writing this, I asked him, I just said, Andy, are any of these really credible? Like, and he said one was, you know, that there is a lot of belief that about 5 years ago, and not too far from here, you know, in my area, because like I said, there's wilderness right across at the end of the beach. And you know, it's Old Lyme is an interesting town because it's right on the Connecticut River. So there's all this ledge and hills and a lot of wild space. And I think that Claire is in this certain kind of jeopardy from a human being. And she's so comfortable in nature that she almost finds comfort thinking that it's, you know, it's like a daemon, you know, from the Golden Compass, from um, it's almost like a protector. She feels that about it. And I think in a way that's also Native American, um, tribal. And so it felt real to me when I was writing it.
I liked it a lot. And I mean, it's certainly nature that, well, first the old structure and then nature that really saves her, but also her ability learned from her father to survive. She has a set of survival skills that he has taught her that make it possible for her um, to survive, but you know, or not survive. I don't want to give anything away by saying she survives, but anyway, it's
It's
a
from
fascinating story. But I really do think that it would make an extremely good long form TV series. So I'll be hopeful that maybe that might happen.
that would be wonderful. I
It
would be
really would. Let me check, Pat. Let me retrieve our masked bandit up here at the front of the store who's got the Facebook thing and see what's going on.
So we do have some really nice comments.
Oh, good. We have lots of nice comments, he says. He's going to take a quick look here and see what we need to relay. I am not able to do this and monitor the Facebook feed. I've tried and it just doesn't work for me.
So we have one reader who really does have a question about the fact that she doesn't like books that have a lot of domestic violence and abuse in them. Is this a book that she should read, or
Oh,
is she-
absolutely. No. You won't be unhappy with it. The question was the comment was she doesn't like a lot of domestic violence and abuse, but that's really not the point of this book. Well,
No,
it's not graphic, let me put it that way.
it's not physical abuse. That's, you know, I think that it needs to be taken note of, that emotional abuse is as damaging in many cases, even more so. And that is part of the story. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it's not the main part of the story. It's sort of a background, something that Claire was affected by this powerful man she's married to, who, you know, like, who charmed her and who was engaging. I mean, he's about to run for governor and everyone loves him, but you know, things happen behind closed doors sometimes where it looks one way, it looks perfect, but then it's a completely different way at home. My mother had a name for it. Um, Gosh, it was street angel, house devil. I think it's an Irish saying. And it's like, you know, on the street, out in public, the person can be just so jolly and so fun, and then close the door and it's moody and angry and a feeling of oppression. But you know, as I mentioned, most of that is in the background of what she went
Yeah,
through.
it is in the background. I mean, you know, it's like writing about sex. You can either take them up to the bedroom door or you can go inside. Back to my comment about Bridgerton, it could easily have been one episode shorter.
there are a lot of great comments about Luanne's ability to make the reader cry and to feel
Ah.
emotion.
So you're getting comments about your terrific ability to make readers cry and feel emotion. Do you get a lot of comments yourself along those lines?
I do. I haven't gotten it so much for the suspense novels, although I cry when I'm writing them. So I guess I'm feeling something. Maybe the reader picks up on that or feels what I'm feeling. But I know that when I wrote Cloud Nine, my publisher at the time sent the galleys out with bags of Kleenex
Really?
because it was sad. It was a tearjerker. I mean, not intentionally, but it was based on my mother and her illness and death. But it was a love story along the way too. So yeah, I guess that.
Well, but if you can inhabit, your own emotions and then translate them into narrative, I think that's a wonderful gift.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Just lots of comments of love and
Oh.
respect for her writing.
Lots of love and respect for your writing.
Well, right back to you, readers. I love you, and I'm so grateful that you stick with me and that you're reading this one and you've read the others too. So thank you.
What happened to the cat?
There are 4 cats,
Oh,
and it's kind of, she wanted some attention, and now she's giving me the cold shoulder a little bit. But one is napping right there, one is right there. The other one is on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I know that. But Emelina, she might come back. She was a little miffed.
I just loved it when she was running up and down the stairs behind you. It was a great visual. So Luanna, I always like to end by giving readers encouragement that there will be a new book. So now that the Shadow Box is published, what is it you're working on now?
I'm working on another novel that does bring back some of the characters from both Last Day and the Shadow Box, um, and does link to both, although it's a standalone. And I'm also working on a new young adult novel to be my 4th young adult. And Amy Friedman is my editor at Scholastic and is wonderful to work with. And it actually has a murder. It's about my last young adult was Pretend She's Here, and that was a very creepy kidnapping story. And this one is about a murder in a small town and how it affects the teens in the town. And but the next one for Thomas and Mercer will be a continuation in some ways of these 2.
Yeah, it's a real siren song from small towns and long buried secrets, isn't there?
It is. What is that thing about, how do you ever travel in England and not get murdered in a little Cotswold village? Because there's so many cozy mysteries, but it's true. Oh, in my area though, I will just there are 2 wonderful writers who live in Old Lyme. One, David Handler. Do you know David's
I
work?
do. Yep.
David
Yours
calls,
work.
David calls Old Lyme Dorset. Dominic Dunn lived in our town and called it Prudhomme.
Okay.
And I live here and I call it Black Hall. But there are an inordinate number of dark and terrible murders that have taken place within like a stone's throw of this beautiful, bucolic art world place, and just endlessly inspiring.
Real murders as opposed to fictional murders?
Real murders. In fact, the one that Last Day was based on was inspired by, was my family was involved. My ex-husband was a witness, an alibi witness for the murderer. An unwilling alibi witness, and it was, it's really a terrible thing. And it actually was very much like what Last Day ended up being, but about a woman who was found strangled on her bed while her husband was off on a sailing trip. And it was really just almost within sight of the land I live on, of the peninsula I live on. It was the next peninsula. And that's but one, but that was very close to home. Obviously, it was many years ago, but it stayed in my
Wow.
mind, of course. Yeah.
I'm going to recommend a book to you. It's one I acquired and edited for Poison Pen Press. It's by Thomas Kies, Kies, and it's called Random Road. And it takes place in Connecticut in a very gilded community. And I think it is just marvelous.
Oh gosh, I don't have a.
I'll email it to you because there are a couple of books that aside from 18 Tiny Lives, there are two other books that I would recommend. The other one is by Doug Burgess, and it came out originally, it's called Fogland Point, but it's been reissued. It's called Dark Currents.
Okay.
And I will describe it to you as murders, dementia, an unusual love story, and pirates.
Ooh.
It is really wonderful, but I think you'd enjoy both of them. So I'll drop you a note and recommend them. For those of you listening, Thomas Kies, Kies, Random Road, and Doug Burgess, Dark Currents. Highly recommend them. If you're a Luanne Rice reader, you will enjoy them. So let me remind you that now that we know that we have this gorgeous book with the dust jacket, but even better, this gorgeous cover, autographed copies from Luanne. So grab one while we still have them. Luanne, thank you for spending time with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Barbara. It was such a pleasure. And as you started, when you introduced me and you told the readers that I love your bookstore, I really love your bookstore. It's everybody who passes through Scottsdale has to go there. It's iconic, and it's wonderful, and you're wonderful. And thank you for supporting all of us so much, all those writers.
Well, thank you for your kind words. We're going to have to reopen our iconic bookstore here before too long. But, we had this dreadful resurgence of infection in Arizona. Maybe the number 2 spot, Pat?
Number 2 spot.
And we have, this is our 31st year. So aside from me being 80, we also have some older staff. And I can't subject them to that kind of a risk. But fortunately, we've always been, we're not really a local bookstore. We've always, like 70% of our customers don't live here. So we've been able to manage being closed for the staff's protection. And I don't want it to go on because we really miss everybody. I mean, we did these fabulous in-store events. We have people pulsing out the door, on a regular basis, people in the parking lot, watching on their phones if they couldn't get inside. We're used to a wonderful interaction with people flew in from all over, not just all over the United States, but would fly in from London or Toronto or Jamaica or other places, to attend our events.
That's
one of my absolute favorites. I always love this story. Is Bernard Cornwell. The only time he's been here, he didn't like going on book tour, but we knew each other, so he agreed to come one time. And we were standing in line, and this little boy shuffled up there with his parents, and he was clutching a copy of the book. When they got there, the parents said that this is what he wanted for his birthday and how excited they were to bring him, and he could meet Bernard. And they had stopped at the airport Barnes and Noble to buy the book. And we all maintained, perfect composure because they were so clueless. But at the same time, it was really sweet. So I hope we can go back to it. I really do. But we so much appreciate the support of your fans and other fans who've watched the videos and listened to the podcasts and are still buying books. And so we're still here. And with any luck, we'll be able to open up again in another month or two. I sure hope so.
Well, anyway, I know what I'm ordering from you. As soon as I get that email, I'm going to order those books right away from your website. I'm sure they're on there.
Thank you. It wasn't a sales pitch, but I could hardly resist recommending books to authors. Actually, it's a funny thing. Some of our very best customers are in fact authors. I mean, it really, Lisa Scottolini would be an example, Linda Fairstein, Dana Stabenow. I mean, we have loads of authors who are just great. And
I love Lisa. And Lisa's another one who gave me a quote. Lisa and Harlan Coben. And I know writers are the best and so supportive of each other. And Lisa,
they will all be here in March. Harlan on March 15th, Lisa on March 20th. We're lucky that we get this panoply of authors. But anyway, it's just been wonderful to reconnect with you. Thank you so much. Enjoy your evening. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Barbara.